Well, afternoon, Johnny. How are you today?
Hi, Peter. Very well, thanks.
Good man, good man. Johnny, tell me a little, please, about you and your business.
Sure. So I'm a sports lawyer at a law firm called Sheridans, based in London, but with a presence in Belfast and Dublin as well. And I guess Sheridans would be perhaps not your typical law firm in some ways, in the sense that it focuses solely on the sports, media, entertainment industries. And obviously a big part of the entertainment industry is sport and the business of sport. So I'm a partner in our kind of sports, esports team. We've got about 12 lawyers in our core team. And typically we would represent anyone from individual professional athletes and their agents and agencies to teams, clubs, governing bodies, federations, sports tech and data companies, brands, marketing agencies. So I guess it's anyone within the business of sport and I guess more broadly entertainment would be who I would typically work with.
And how did you end up pursuing that niche of law?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I started my legal career back in Belfast and Dublin at a brilliant law firm called A&L Goodbody. But I guess thinking back even to my law studies as an undergraduate, I always had this slight pipe dream of wanting to work in the sports industry. And I think that probably came from being a bit obsessed with sport growing up, you know, in terms of playing sport or watching sport or just being interested in the more business side of the sports industry as well. So I always had that kind of draw to potentially exploring a way of being a lawyer within the sports industry. And I kind of knew that if I wanted to go down that path, I probably needed to A, come to London, and B, find one of a very small number of specialist kind of media boutique entertainment firms that would specialize in the sports industry.
And are there any particular sports that you gravitate towards or you're more involved in, or is it really across the piece?
It's a good question. I mean, we would typically advise right across the board. I guess there would be some sports that would make up a bigger portion of our client base and revenue simply because of the size of the industry from a commercial point of view. So the football industry would be the obvious one. The value of deals within the football industry, whether that be player contracts, transfers, sponsorship deals, would be typically higher than a sport like rugby or cricket. Tennis and golf are obviously certainly in the mix. And then I would also do quite a bit on the kind of online influencer marketing, esports, video gaming talent front, which is obviously a whole new world, but obviously the value of those rights and those kind of commercial deals is catching up with where somewhere like a football is at.
Can you tell, you don't have to mention names or numbers, but can you elaborate a little on that around the sort of image rights and some of the things you mentioned there?
In the football context?
Yeah, or in any sport,
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of what I would do would be advising, for example, a player or an athlete on their, not just their on-field activities, but also their off-field commercial activities. And for a lot of athletes, what they do off the field of play from a commercial brand point of view is, you know, arguably as important, because it's an opportunity for them to future-proof their career post-professional athlete. It's an opportunity to obviously, you know, generate revenue and, you know, create a brand and position themselves in a particular way. So a lot of what I would do would be endorsement, ambassador deals, sponsorship agreements. A lot of high-profile athletes would typically have what's called an image rights company, which is a vehicle that they would use to contract with brands and kind of enter into any of their commercial activity. That obviously requires a fair bit of legal and also kind of tax advice to get that structure right. And then obviously there's the whole social media, digital media piece, which is a huge opportunity for athletes if it's done well. Obviously there can be pitfalls as well, but yeah, there's a whole web of contractual agreements to kind of help an athlete with from the early stage of their career right the way through to kind of post on-field career as well.
I can't believe you'd rather do that than sort of litigation and
Property
house
stuff.
purchases. And yeah, absolutely. Very strange, very strange. No, listen, thanks very much for sharing it. Is there any particular business leader that inspires you the most?
That's a good question. I guess working in the industry that I'm fortunate to work in, I think I'm quite lucky in that a lot of the business leaders that I get to work with tend to be very creative and entrepreneurial, and just generally very impressive, because they're at the cutting edge of sport and entertainment, whether from a kind of sports technology point of view or data or representing athletes. And I guess that's inspiring to see how kind of cutting edge their ideas and their businesses are. In terms of anyone in particular that I'd probably single out, I mean, I would probably say that the two senior business leaders in the team that I work in at Sheridans, Andrew Nixon and Daniel G, certainly have been kind of an inspiration to me over the years, because they kind of put a lot of trust in me at the outset of my career at Sheridans, gave me a platform to kind of build my own practice, and they're just fantastic kind of managers of people as well, and kind of builders of relationships. So I'd probably single those two out if I had to.
All right, brilliant. And what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Another great question, Peter. Best piece of advice I've ever been given. I guess it's maybe less a piece of advice, more a bit of a nugget of wisdom that I came across a few years ago, actually via Daniel G, my colleague at Sheridans. And it's the idea that luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And I'm not sure, you're nodding. I don't know whether you've heard that one before. I'm sure you might have done.
It rings a bell. I can't quite attribute it, but I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes from I think a Roman philosopher, and it kind of resonated with me, and I kind of every so often I kind of find myself thinking about it again. And I've certainly been guilty, as many of us I'm sure have, of getting trapped in the view that that the best sports teams, the best businesses, the best brands are lucky. And actually, when you flip that and you view luck in a different way, and you actually focus on the value of really good preparation, and it's the whole idea that it's the idea that was in the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, and he talks about the habit of just being consistent. I find that fascinating when you apply that to luck, in that if you are just really consistent with preparing well for every client you have, every meeting you have, suddenly opportunities will arise, and you may find yourself in a lucky position. So yeah, it's definitely something I try to remember when I'm getting dragged down into different ways of thinking.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a great example, and a great read. Atomic Habits is a terrific book. The luck. Whenever you said that always springs to mind with me is Gary Player. Was the more I practice, the luckier I get. So I guess that ties in with that.
The other one is you mentioned Gary Player. There's the Michael Jordan quote, which I'm trying to remember. It's the one that he talks about, like he missed 9,000 shots. He lost 300 games. He had 26 game-winning shots. He kept on failing, but that's why he succeeded, or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've got another Michael Jordan story, but I'll tell you that. And so, who's the first person that comes to mind whenever you think about the word success?
We could probably start with Michael Jordan and Gary Player if we wanted to, but yeah, success is an interesting one, because I was probably a bit naive in my young years in kind of assuming that success in business or otherwise was just down to being consistently brilliant at whatever your field was. And there's a guy called Mark Pollock, who you may have come across. He's an incredible adventure athlete. He races endurance events in mountains and deserts around the world. I think he was the first blind person to race to the South Pole. he lost his sight when he was 22, I think. He's from Northern Ireland. And so the endurance events he's done have been incredible. And he also tragically had a very bad accident and was paralyzed as a result. So he's experienced like the sort of adversity that most of us can only begin to kind of imagine. But anyway, my reason for bringing up Mark was that we were quite fortunate to get Mark on our sports business podcast during lockdown, and he spoke about kind of success, and he spoke about it in a way that I'd never really heard or appreciated before, and it was so powerful. And he basically talked about this idea of spectators and competitors, and he talked about how most of us, and I probably put myself in this camp, most of us are reluctant spectators sitting in the sidelines, kind of not too scared, but reluctant to risk failure or kind of put ourselves out there. And he then talked about how there's then a chosen few who are willing to kind of define themselves by their willingness to try and risk failure. And he relates that back to then how you define success. And I think that's fascinating when you apply that to particularly business, because and I'm guilty of it. It is easy to stay in your comfort zone, not stick your head above the parapet and kind of, risk things not happening the way you want them to happen. So that's my long-winded answer, but I think Mark Pollock probably is someone who I always think back to and what he said on that podcast.
Oh, brilliant. I'll look into that story. That sounds excellent and very inspirational. What would you say, Jonny, that the either Sheridans or the world of sports law looks like in 5 years' time?
It's a really interesting question. I think one of the biggest challenges of working in the sports industry, and especially being a lawyer, is keeping up with the rate and the speed at which the sports industry changes. And that's kind of my constant challenge, is identifying what's next around the corner and identifying what our clients are doing, what the industry is doing, and what the new trends are going to be in 1 to 5 years' time. And there are lots of kind of exciting examples of what those trends might be, whether it be, digital content and streaming, esports, the whole phenomenon of Web3 and the metaverse and how it's kind of almost replacing social media Web 2 world. So I definitely think looking ahead to a few years down the track, those kind of new crossover areas between kind of traditional sport and the more entertainment world is probably where our business will go. And that's probably just a natural transition. And, we always kind of debate in our team as to whether we're actually sports lawyers or whether we're sports and entertainment lawyers, because the kind of lines between sport and entertainment are obviously quite blurred. And I guess hopefully in 5 years' time, I'll still be fortunate enough to be kind of working in sport, because I think it is easy to kind of take for granted the fact that, I am definitely very fortunate to be able to work in an industry that I love and, with such amazing kind of clients. So hopefully I'll be fortunate still to be working in the sports industry, and I'd certainly love to be building out our kind of Irish practice a little bit more in the next few years. Obviously, our base is London. The size of the sports industry in London is in the UK is that bit bigger, but I think it's really exciting to see some of the technology and the innovation coming out of Ireland, north and south, from a kind of sports and media point of view. So I'd love to be kind of seeing where our Irish practice can go in the next 5 years.
Brilliant. Sounds like an exciting prospect. And you mentioned Atomic Habits earlier on. Are there any podcasts that you would recommend or that you enjoy?
Yeah, well, anyone who knows me will know that I do enjoy a good kind of sports business podcast or book generally. From a sports business point of view, I like Unofficial Partner. It kind of has some really great guests from the sports industry and kind of tackles some of the kind of cutting edge areas which are kind of shaping the future of sport. It did one recently on the crossover between sport, or the opportunity for sport in Web3 and the metaverse and NFTs. And I think that's it's obviously a bit of a talking point at the minute for lots of industries, but I definitely think it's one that probably isn't going to go away. So that's definitely one that I'd probably single out.
And if somebody wanted to get in touch with you or potentially look at engaging the services of Sheridans or exploring that further, what would be the best way to get in touch, Jonny?
Yeah, well, perhaps a good starting point would be our social media. So we certainly try to be quite forward thinking in terms of the content that we create on social media. So we have a lot of content on our Twitter handle at Sheridan Sport. We've got an Instagram channel launching shortly, and got YouTube, and we've got a website called The Back Page, which is basically a content hub where we keep all of our video, audio, written blog content, again, kind of written by lots of our different experts at Sheridans, and then some of our clients in the industry as well. So yeah, always happy to kind of hear from anyone who wants to sit over a coffee or beer or otherwise and talk about where the sports industry is heading.
That's fantastic. Well, Jonny Madill of Sheridans, listen, thanks very much for sharing a little about your journey and the fascinating world of sports law, sports and entertainment law. So thanks very much, Jonny.
Thanks very much, Peter. Thanks for having me.